Hello, and welcome to the April edition of Michigan Gardener. You can see that our spring flowers are coming up. Some daffodils. Did you hear that? That was a pileated woodpecker. We've got one around here, and hopefully we'll be able to hear him again, but they don't really make so much of a call, but you hear that hollow tuk 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 tuk. He'll do it again here. So the daffodils, the species name for that is Narcissus, and then another name after that depending on the particular daffodil. Narcissus because if you look, the flowers tend to be pointing downward to protect them from the rain, so that, there it was again, so that bees can get up in there. Really good early pollinator food. And then everybody knows the best daffodil that has a second name is Narcissus assoanus, but that's not what this one is. And then these little purple flowers are something called Glory of the Snow is the common name. There he was again. And the species name for that is Scilla lucilii. Scilla, if you look that up in the dictionary or online, it'll say a bulb plant. Well, that's not the Latin name. The closest there we went. The closest translation I can find is into an old English word from like the Middle Ages called squill, which is a basket, and then lucilii is light, so it's like a basket of light, and those grow from bulbs. These are all wild growing here, and they'll seed and spread, you know, over time. You don't really have to do anything. If you've got them, you got them. Love that sound. Well, this is one of my favorite times of year, and it's the time of year where things change not daily but hourly. So from this morning to this noon, the Forsythia bushes have come into bloom. And if you don't know what those are, it's the really twiggy looking bushes that people tend to neglect that get yellow flowers for like a week in the spring. And that is the traditional time for when you should prune your roses. Now last year, if you'd asked me what was the least likely thing for me to ever grow in my garden, I would have said roses, because I like vegetables. But I have these two rose bushes and I'm really fond of them, and it's time to prune them. So you always want to start with some really clean cutters, and the first thing I'm looking for is dead stuff. So things like a lot of the ends of these are going to be kind of bad because of winter, and anything that's dead we're just going to go ahead and cut out right away. So I know this part here is dead down to there, and you know, just probably the ends are what you're mostly going to be concerned with right now. And we'll get all the dead stuff out of here, then I'll talk about what to do next. So there's most of the dead stuff is gone. One more little thing here. You don't want to leave dead stuff in there because it'll lead to infection and things. The next thing you do is try to make sure that there aren't any branches that cross each other that are going to rub on each other. And there aren't any here. This is a fairly new rose bush. And then the final thing I do is try to prune it to a shape to kind of keep an overall form to the bush, understanding that this is going to grow quite a bit this year. I don't like this big tall branch or this thing back here that's kind of growing up. So I'm going to take this off right above where another shoot is coming up, because I want it to grow how I want it to grow, and it's just going to have to mind me. And this one here too, I don't like that it's coming way up, so I'm going to trim this, and we'll see what this becomes over the next few years. Again, trying to keep the center open to prevent infections, keep any dead stuff out of there, and then have a nice overall shape to the rose bush. So those are kind of my general principles, and we'll see how this grows this year. I'm hopeful because it's got nice stuff, and the thorns are absolutely ripping me to pieces here. So that's it. A job that we want to get done fairly early in spring is to take and do a little bit of yard cleanup. And one of the things I like to start with is these ornamental grasses. I like to leave them up over the winter because it's something to look at anyway instead of snow. But now it's time for them to come down. I'm going to be using these grasses for a special project that we'll get to in just a second here. Some ornamental grasses like these tend to grow really early, and you can't just come through here with a hedge cutter and chop that. So you just grab the brown stuff and try to pull it out the best you can without damaging the rest of the plant. The other thing you could do would be at the end of the season just go like that, so you don't have to leave it a little straggly looking, but very quickly this will grow and all of that brown will be gone from there. The way I'm going to use this grass will require it to be shredded, so we'll get on with that task. So here's the mysterious project. I'm going to try composting this year, and I chose these kind of off-the-ground rotary bins for a couple reasons. First is it's really easy to turn your compost, and it's important to do that to have it actually compost. And the second is no critters are going to get in there, and it's not going to ideally serve as an attractant for varmints and such like this. But basically what you have to do if you're going to compost is you need equal parts brown and green. At least equal parts. Some people like more brown in there than green, and the reason being is that the brown is carbon and the green is nitrogen, and you want a little bit of moisture but not too much. Most people who have problems with their compost are having problems because they don't have enough brown in there. So really you can't really overdo it. But I have these bins plus 2 others, so I should, with any luck, be able to produce a couple 100 gallons of compost that at the end of the year I can spread on the vegetable plot so that the worms and things work that in and drag it in. But we'll start off all of our bins with brown and then transition over to green. Now what I've got in this bag here is a couple months worth of production from a loamy composter, and it's a electric composter that you can keep inside your house. And this is not compost, it's like pre-compost, because in order for it to be compost it has to be decomposed by bacteria and things like that, and the loamy doesn't do that, despite what anybody would claim. Instead, it gets you really well on your way to good compost. The reason I bought the loamy was I knew I was going to try composting this year, and I wanted something to process the scraps from the winter, vegetable scraps, and that seemed like the best option. We'll see. That was literally like a month and a half, 2 months of vegetable scraps, and since we cook everything from scratch, that was quite a bit of vegetable volume. And if nothing else, it gives me something to do with the vegetables that I use over the winter, but it also breaks it down really well. Another mistake that people make sometimes when they're making compost and adding things to their bin is that they don't break it down enough. You want a lot of surface area, so you know, you don't want to put like a whole green pepper in there, for instance, because that's going to take like forever to break down. And then like with this brown, the grasses, the reason I shredded them was to increase the surface area, so that we can, you know, get the composting started sooner rather than later. A final thing, if you don't have enough brown material to put into your compost bin, another thing you can use is called horse bedding, and it's basically these little pellets of compressed sawdust, and that makes fantastic brown material. The other thing is shredded newspaper and shredded cardboard will serve excellent for brown material for your compost bin. More brown is better, like I said. So I'll finish this up and we'll probably add a little water, maybe just a little bit to get the process started. And we'll be checking up on this over the course of the summer and fall to see how we're doing. We'll take some temperature measurements and such like that. I don't know, it's a neat project. Going along with the theme of this time of year changing not just daily but hourly, this rhododendron was not in bloom last night, and it was this morning. So we've got blooms opening up all over the plant, and probably by tomorrow or the next day this will be fully in bloom. Now, this is what you get if you water it in the fall. If you forget to water your rhododendrons in the fall, all of these buds will fall off and you won't have any flowers that next year.
All right, we are out here in the vegetable garden, and I'm really excited to show you the structures that Kyle and I made. These are going to be great structures for different plants to grow up. To my right is kind of an intricate structure that's going to house our loofah gourds, and we're going to plant a bunch this year. Last year they did not turn out. To my left is an example of a smaller pyramid that we built using, all of these are using saplings that we dug up out of our witchy woods. And these will be for cucumbers and zucchinis and sweet peas. To build one of these pyramids, or even a more complicated structure like this one, you just take your saplings or your hazel cuttings or whatever it is that you're using, and you bury one end a little bit into the ground. You form a pyramid, you tie them at the top, and then you take gardening twine and you wrap it securely around and around and around until you get to the bottom, and that's all there is to it. This is going to be our landscaping project, the main one for this year. Last year we did the other side of the front door, and we need the new plants to kind of match age-wise and side-wise. We are going to be repurposing this river rock to make a path through our witchy woods. And I just have to make one more plea, people. Please treat your plants right. Don't put down weed barrier and river rock. As you can see, all it does is collect a whole bunch of soil for weeds to grow in, and it causes your roots to grow up at the surface of everything instead of digging down into the ground to search for water.
April's really the good time to get your vegetable plot ready for the year, because as soon as Mother's Day hits or historical date of last frost wherever you live, you're going to want to get stuff into the ground and you want things ready. So this in here is all brand new, never been tilled before, earth that we burnt 2 huge burn piles on, and spread fertilizer and all sorts of other things. And this is where the tomatoes are going to grow this year, because last year they grew over there. Now with tomatoes, you have to move them. You cannot, or you should not, plant your tomatoes in the same spot every year. In fact, the next time these come in here is the 3rd year from now. So this year, next year they'll be somewhere else, and the year after they can come back here. And that's because they tend to accumulate diseases and things in the soil. The other thing that you should not plant here is relatives of the tomato, so tomatillos, so your physalis branch of the plant family, potatoes, eggplants, anything that's in any way related to a tomato should not be planted here for until it's the 3rd year. So how I've done this is, when I grow tomatoes, I grow them for real, and a simple cage is not enough to hold up these monsters that I grow. So every 3.5 feet I planted a really good stake, and then when it's time to plant, I'll plant a plant next to each stake, and then right away put the cage in, because you don't want the plant to get big and then try caging it, because that's just not going to work. And then the cage gets zip tied to the stake. Otherwise they'll just fall over. Like, there's no controlling these tomatoes that I grow. They get massive. And this should be pretty generous spacing. Most guides recommend between 2 and 3 feet between tomato plants, so I figured 3.5 should be really good. Other than that, we're pretty well set. This is pretty much ready to be planted with everything, but that has to wait till May, and you'll see all of that. We should have some tulips coming up sooner or later, because I planted 800 bulbs, but the ones that have come up so far, the deer have taken partiality to. Also in this episode, in addition to pileated woodpeckers, we have some really neat things to show you. We went on a trip to Iowa and visited a special kind of ecology there that I think you'll enjoy. One of the other things I did in Iowa was to get ready for bunnies, because we controlled for deer with the electric fence, but I had to get ready for the bunnies that are going to come too.
One of the ecosystems that I personally love is an oak savanna. And what an oak savanna is it's a tree ecosystem that is fire adapted, and therefore fire is a very necessary part of its existence, particularly in Iowa, where there are many invasives that fortunately are not fire adapted. So on an annual basis, in the late winter, early spring, I will burn the entire surface area of my woods in order to thin out multiflora rose, honeysuckle, and a whole myriad of really adverse species. And as a result, I get an open, nice woods that I can walk in and enjoy year-round. So you may think, oh my gosh, why does this guy burn his woods? The reality is that all of the trees that are in these woods are fire adapted, oak and hickory primarily. And the neat thing about that is that trees that are fire adapted, their leaves crinkle up when they dry to facilitate burning, as opposed, for instance, to a maple forest. The leaves mat down and literally smother the soil and form a film to prevent fire, because they're not fire adapted. So you can just burn away in the woods and it rejuvenates the whole ecosystem. It's just wonderful. The other ecosystem that I try to reconstruct is a tall grass prairie. Iowa had over 97% of its surface area at one time occupied by a sea of grass, and unfortunately less than 0.1% of the original tall grass prairie exists in the state of Iowa. So people reconstruct them, and what I did is I had a soybean field that had been treated with glyphosate, which kills everything except the soybeans that are adapted to it. And so it was a very clean seed bed. I simply drilled a seed mixture that I got from a local seed purveyor and let it grow. And about 3 years later, I burned it for the first time, and it is maintenance free, and literally all it requires is a burn every 2 or 3 years. You only burn part of it because you don't want to get rid of all of the habitat for the animals that live in it. And I can tell you that it's just full of pheasants, deer, upland birds of all kinds, and just a myriad of other things, and it facilitates just a great ecosystem out here.
All right, here we have some sweet peas that Kyle planted on March 1st, and we need to do a little maintenance on these. What we have is plants that have a very strong apical shoot. This is going to produce an abundance of a hormone that will suppress side shoots, and we want to remove that because the side shoots are where you get your blossoms. We want the side shoots to grow, obviously, so we're just going to take the apical shoot down to a set of leaves, just like that.
This plant has recently come into bloom here towards the end of April. It's a Virginia bluebell. The scientific name is Mertensia virginica. I wish that I could say that Mertensia meant something in Latin. It doesn't. It's just the name of a German botanist named Mertens. Anyway, and he did a lot of stuff, but these plants have these nice blue flowers, and all parts of this plant are actually edible, which I didn't know, and Native Americans used them for lung problems, as a treatment for tuberculosis, and a bunch of other things. But this particular plant must be extremely hardy, because when Gretchen made her path, she popped a giant rock on top of it, and it seems to be doing fine. Now these will readily spread by seed, and there's a couple more plants down that way of the same variety, so we'll see in a few years if we can get some more to grow in the woods.
Here's one of my favorite plants, full in bloom in springtime. This is called Pulmonaria. The common name is lungwort. It's named lungwort because in medieval times it was used as a treatment for lung ailments. It is a beautiful shade garden plant. It likes to grow kind of at the edge of woodlands. It is non-invasive, but it does spread. The roots creep along and will form new shoots. I have a pair. This one is doing much better than that one. I think that one is a lot smaller because there was a tree right behind it. This is another favorite perennial of mine for shade gardens. This is called Brunnera, and this variety is named Jack Frost. It's named Jack Frost because it looks like the leaves actually have a layer of frost on them with the veining. I have another variety back there called Queen of Hearts. All of the Brunneras like to grow in shade. They have delicate blue flowers in the springtime, and the rest of the season do really nice as kind of a foil for darker leafed plants, ferns, hostas, and the like.
This is the unpredictability of weather in late April. This is why we don't put our stuff out until we're absolutely sure that there's not going to be any more frost, usually Mother's Day. Well, now it's getting pretty close to planting, probably a couple more weeks, but something you always have to do for plants that you've grown inside is to do what's called hardening them off. And so basically all I do is I just put these outside for the first day, probably just a few hours of sun, and then just back into the open garage, so they are still outside getting used to the temperatures, and gradually increase the amount of time you have them in the sun each day, because they'll probably get sunburnt if you don't. The other thing is at night, the temperatures are still dropping into the 30s, and that's not too good for plants like this. So they just go into the garage and it never really gets below about 55 in there. The peach tree is flowering, which means that we're very likely to have peaches this year. And directly behind me is a cherry tree that should start flowering in the next few weeks. We'll be sure to catch some images of that. But that is it for April. Only another day left, and I need to get this video made, so we'll catch you in May.